means our legacy. So it's very fitting that we will be dealing with sustainability in this pavilion. This afternoon we have a very exciting session. We have 4 presentations, and this session has been organized by Qatar Foundation. The 4 sessions will look at issues related to climate negotiations, sustainability in Qatar, circular economy, and greenhouse gas accounting. So let me introduce our first speaker. The first session will be on climate change negotiations and youth, and the presentation will be made by Mr. Sebastian Turbo from EarthNA and Dr. Daniela Corsaro from the IULM in Milan. Sebastian, please.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. So indeed, my name is Sebastian Turbo. I am the Director of Content and External Affairs at EarthNA, that Gonzalo just introduced. We were launched in March of 2022, so in March of this year, so we are a relatively new center. To quickly maybe introduce to you, for those of you who are less familiar with EarthNA, our main mission is to design practical action policies on sustainability, specifically for hot and arid climates. We seek to achieve our mission by, 1, leveraging the formidable research and knowledge coming out of Qatar at large, but more specifically of Qatar Foundation, and working with our partners and fellow entities such as KIRI, HBKU, TAMUK, and others. And then we try to translate this research and this knowledge into policies that are useful not only for Qatar, but also for the world and other countries, that are also hot and arid. We also use our home campus of Education City as a kind of playground, a sandbox, to be able to test and to pilot some of these policies that we are working on. And then finally, we have a global mandate, which brings us here to CoP27. And this is to convene a global community of like-minded researchers and policymakers on hot and arid climates. In this global focus, we have a key pillar, being a Qatar Foundation entity, around youth and policy making. And as we launched EarthNA, and on this specific topic, a question we quickly asked ourselves was, well, are today's youth in Doha, in Qatar, and in the world, do they feel equipped? And the short answer is apparently no. The research that exists will show you that the youth do not feel equipped to meaningfully participate, or at least that's what they say. And so then the question became for us, okay, how can we as EarthNA support them and equip them with the skills to be able to better participate and engage in these negotiations? And one interesting fact that came out of these surveys was that when you asked them, okay, what are the skills that you feel you are missing? Well, it wasn't necessarily policy-making skills and negotiation skills. What they were saying is they lacked, and this could be very surprising from this younger generation, they were saying it's communication skills. The capacity to communicate and engage with policymakers, of course, but also, and even more surprisingly, the capacity to engage and communicate with amongst themselves, amongst their peers. And this is where we connected with IULM, who had also been working for a couple of years on this question of climate change negotiations, youth, and the specific questions of communication. And this is where I'm actually happy to announce today, officially for the first time, that EarthNA, Qatar Foundation, and IULM have partnered on a global research that has just started. Well, actually not just started, the global survey has just started, but the research has been going on for quite some time, to really better understand what are the challenges and the gaps in terms of communication, use, and climate change negotiations. In just a few seconds, I will pass the floor to my colleague and friend, Daniela Corsaro, who will introduce us, who will walk us through in more detail on the research and the methodology. But just to say that the final report and the results of this research will be presented and announced at our EarthNA Summit in 2023 on March 8 and 9 in Doha. So please, if you're interested in this question, please join us. Consider this as an official invitation for you to come to Doha to our first summit. And if you're interested, please reach out and we'd be happy to connect you to the team. So without further ado, thank you very much, and I'll pass the floor to my colleague Daniela. Daniela, here you go.
Okay, I use this, yeah. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Let me first of all say that I'm really honored for being here. I would like to thank you, the State of Qatar. I would like to thank you, Qatar Foundation and HERTN, which are having such an active role in our research. First of all, few words. Let me say, no, this go, the green one, okay. Yeah. A few words about our university. We have three main faculties. One is about language. The second one is the main faculty is in communication and public relations, and the third one in tourism and markets. Maybe you could wonder why your university is promoting such a global project. And the reason is that the Italian Minister for Ecological Transition, along with the World Bank, with the Connect for Climate, promoted in 2021 event, which now became permanent, with a scope to find ways to engage more youth, in the public, in the political debate. And we have been the only one university in the world admitted to join the Youth for Climate. And this gave us the opportunity to collect much data. Of course, we are, however, an international university. This is also one of the reasons we are here today. Before explaining the methodology and the preliminary findings of our study, I would like to make just a little premise about the context, because I think we all know, it is evident that youth nowadays, they really want and they really pretend to being part of the social and political debate on climate change. And they also want that countries, but even companies, to take a position on climate-related issue. And if we think about companies, they are doing that. We are collaborating with a rep track company. It's a multinational company that measures the reputation of countries and companies. And what they are showing, you can see it in the first graph, is that there is a direct relationship between the way companies communicate ESG and their increasing reputation, okay? So communicating nowadays sustainability, CSR, is fundamental for a country, for a company. I would like also to quickly show you a map which crosses the data about what companies do in practice. It has not been measured by me, it has been measured by Moody's, so very important rating company. This is what they do in practice, and this is how they are perceived, okay? I think that this area is very interesting. Maybe it's very interesting, particularly for you, because here we find the companies that do much for the environment, but people do not perceive it, okay? And here, for instance, we find many oil companies. Oil companies are all here because oil companies, they are concretely investing much in that. But there is an issue about communication. It is not perceived. And if I translate this to youth, during our interviews, I also want to say that young representatives from, let me say, Middle East, they stated that sometimes there is a preconception against them, you know, because of the oil company. But this should not be done. So this was just a premise about the importance of communication to fill the gap between concrete action and what is perceived outside. Moving on with our research, yes, we all agree that youth want to have a larger stake in shaping this future. They express dissent in different ways. You know, sometimes these ways are even too strong form of protest. But in many cases, it's through justice movement. What I think is really interesting is that we are observing a new age of dissent. So less oppositional, less conflicting, and more propositional. So youth are starting to say adults are not the enemies, okay? We have to engage in a proper dialogue if we want to get something. And this is, of course, is a very important passage, but we have to be careful because if we don't engage them, if we exclude youth, there are two risks. The first risk is that they start to critique power and politicians, you know, even without a real reason. And the second is apathy. We should be careful because I'm a bit worried about this data. We have a very powerful platform that are able to social media listening, okay? So we analyzed millions and millions of contents during the first 3 days of CoP27, and we compared it with the same data first 3 days of CoP26. The blue area indicates the engagement of young people on social media during CoP26. The orange during CoP27. What we can see here. Why they are talking less about COP? I'm not happy about that because last year there was much more engagement. Surely this is also due to the fact that Greta Thunberg is not here, you know, and she generated much traffic and much reaction. However, this is relevant for us because we know that it's urgent to involve young people, okay? Because it looks 1 year from the other, what an important change. I also would like to show you the magnitude of conversation around CoP27, and you can see that it becomes darker more or less when the conference is going to start. It means that people are conversating, debating more. This is not, you know, really effective because we have to maintain a high level of engagement, of conversation along the whole year, not only a few weeks before the conference starts. Given this consideration, we are wondering how can we better involve youth, not only in the dialogue, but even in the decision-making process. The first thing is about educating them. The second thing is about not considering young people, I used to say, as half adults. You know, what works in a communication with an adult does not necessarily work toward young people. This is why we decided to carry out a proper research, because we needed to develop ad hoc specific training program. We cannot adapt what we know already in general terms about negotiation. It will be not effective. For all these reasons, we launched our research. It is very important, this point that Sebastian has highlighted before. There are two levels of analysis in our research. The first level is, of course, the way they communicate and negotiate with the institution and politicians. But the first problem is not there, is to reach agreement among their reference groups, but because even there they communicate and they negotiate, okay? The method we adopted, we are a university, so we adopt scientific method. It's a multi-method. We carried out more than 200 interviews to delegates during the 2 Youth for Climate events. So activists from around the world were there, first in Milan and then in New York. We observed, even in a mastery way, the interaction they have done. Now we are here. So we started yesterday to distribute a survey around to youth, and we expect hundreds of questionnaires. And as you said, we are also scanning all conversation in all languages, millions of contents on the web, because you can imagine that the web is an important place where youth conversate, and we need to have also this piece of information. From our preliminary research, the findings, because the research is not yet concluded, we are pretty sure that young people have strengths and they can really contribute to the transformation. And the reasons are different. They are very good at active listening. We are not good so much, you know. We tend to get distracted very easily as adults. They are good and they have a natural empathy in understanding each other's perspective. And this is very important if you want to communicate, you know, with other people. What is then interesting is that they have such a creative negotiation style. So the young people are less oriented, how can I say that, to share the value pie in a logic, I win, you lose. They think in a creative way, how can we make a better pie, okay? New solutions that are not in the initial set. These are very important elements, but at the same time, 91% of them stated that they have received no train before attending important events like COP, like Youth for Climate, and you know, there are many of these events along the year. But there are problems, of course. The first problem is a gap between the language that is used sometimes by institutions and the language youth use. you can see, you know, there are some words that emerge which are a bit risky for us, because they talk much about greenwashing, and we don't want that. We don't want they do not trust companies, that they do not trust government. So it's important to reduce this gap, because let me say that sometimes the language that is used by, by institution is a bit formal, okay? Sometimes it's slightly difficult to find, you know, there is too much distance in the way the parties communicate. This is, again, a comparison between the general voices from institutions, analyzing, again, millions of conversation on forum, blogs, social media, and this is this is the word cloud of youth, you know, collapse, gives rush in death. We have to be careful about the terms that they use. First element, it's crystal clear that we have to find a way to change the language. But it's not only about that. These are some images from Youth for Climate in Milan. I have to say, not because Italy was involved, but it was, the environment was really great. It promoted the communication. When we communicate with the people, okay, it's not only about our abilities, also the place. Look at this. This pavilion is amazing to communicate with you, but I gave a speech, talk in other places. It was very difficult, okay? So even the environment should be proper. This was very good in this sense, but there were some other problems. Look, these are groups that interacted among them, okay? Can you see how their thoughts were translated into Word file? Can you imagine? You use Word. Can you imagine how difficult it is to agree on common issues? So here we can implement much more technology, emerging visual mapping. We do not need to write things on a Word file. The technology, the artificial intelligence can create the map of what we are saying. And this will support communication and help the complex coordination. This is another example. She was the young representative for France. She was really great. But this is the summary that came out after 3 days of discussion in the education group. And she presented that to the Prime Minister of France. So all Prime Ministers were there. Can you see, do you think it's effective? How can I catch which are the priority for these young people? It's impossible with this type of communication. She was great, but you know, they need how to do that. And few more just visuals. Visuals are very important. When visualization, you know, when people show the story of their family, this generates an emotional engagement in the listener. But when they negotiate, it's only about talking, you know. I say something, you reply with something. These guys need also to communicate in different ways because it's part of the way, their natural way to communicate. And let me say, it's effective, very much. It is a visual age in any case. New York, what happened in New York? Here we find the Italian Prime Minister. Sorry. can you see this modality of communication? It's similar to that. I can understand the minister, you know, say something and the youth listen for, and then the other way around. This is okay, but what the youth really want, they want, you know, more interactive. They don't want classes in the traditional way. They want to create groups. What is the problem, you think, in that group, for instance? This was a group, I don't remember if it was about gender, I don't remember, honestly. Which do you think is the problem here? Can you imagine how many people were in this group? Too many people from all around the world. Some speak English, some not. And then there was another group, noisy, no? It was there. So we call young people from all over the world. It's a very important work, and we have to support them. To do that, it's also fundamental the role of people like him, co-facilitator, bridger. But for my opinion, sometimes they are not trained on purpose. They have to be trained on how to guide the discussion among youth. So our idea at the end is not only providing education to them, but also to all the supporting players, like facilitators, okay? We can have a role in the process. So we have a systemic view. To sum up, this is, as I told you, we are a university, so I am the director of the Research Center for International Marketing and Sales Communication in Ulm. And this is somehow our model. We think that training youth and, as I said, other actors, can improve their negotiation style, the communication skill, and so on, but also the interaction among peers. And this has an effect in general on their negotiation and communication abilities. But to do that, it's important also to implement more technology, okay? Because it can, it can leverage or it can reduce our effort. And we also have to care about the context, because when we are not comfortable in a context, you know, it affects also our attitude. No? We want to escape from a situation we are not comfortable. We don't want to stay there. And I also want to make you an example of COP. I have been here in a negotiation table, okay, mixed up with the young people. You know what was a limit to the interaction? I have to be honest about that. There was a big conditioner in the room, enormous conditioner, very, very noisy. So I cannot hear what the other people were saying. Okay, so even context, the physical context impact the relational context. Just me to conclude that this project is really is key for our university, and we are going to put all our efforts there. This is the link to the survey we are going to distribute. The main target are young people, but you can fill in as, you know, to give your opinion on how you see that process. So sorry to take a bit more time. So thank you. It was really a pleasure for me.
Thank you very much, Daniela. This is very exciting. We have time for 2 questions, so you have to stay here still.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniela, for the presentation. I'm Saud Al-Gusaybi. I work with the Qatar Free Zones Authority, and I have a comment and a question out of that comment. I used to work on the COP18 negotiations back in 2012, and we ratified the Doha Amendment, and we worked on that. My comment is that you mentioned how youth have a difficulty with communication and how youth had difficulty with negotiations. For me, when we had COP18, our difficulty was the structure of the UN and how these amendments were structured. We had the perfect language, everyone was perfect and fluent in the language, but you have the technicalities and the issues with the structure when it comes to writing out these resolutions and writing out these protocols and these amendments. Once that was over, one of the lessons we learned was having training for these youth with how the structure of these happens, because I know there are youth members who are very passionate about what they want to do with regards to climate change. But when they come to start working on this, they need to understand, or they don't know that they need to have amendments written up, signatories have to be part of this as well. It's an individual initiative, but you need signatories to be part of your initiative or support your initiative for it to move forward. However passionate you are, there are these limitations to it as well. So what we thought of and what we tried to work with the UNFFC was to create some form of training with the UN, and at the same time training the youth on how the structure of the UN works with regards to these amendments and these protocols, because language is a barrier as well and the negotiations as well, but when it comes to write up your resolutions, it becomes quite difficult for them, especially the structure, especially the technical wording as well. So that was one of the solutions we had. I'm not sure if this is part of your plan as well, or if this is part of the future plans to having a much more better representation from the youth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very interesting question. And I can confirm what you are saying, if I understood well, because it's one of the priority for the youth. They said that we don't know how to write a proposal, okay? No, they are totally lost on that. So, and this is important, even because after the Youth for Climate, all these events, they come out with somehow a manifesto. But if this manifesto is every time a long list of bullet points, you know, it's normal that is not taken into consideration. So thank you so much. We are going to invest in that, to find smart ways to teach them how to make a proper proposal, also using some proper technicalities.
Let's take 2 more questions, and then, yes, your answer combined, or maybe the 3, but very quickly, please, because we're running out of time.
Okay, thank you very much for the interesting presentation and the study. Ahmed Al-Idrisi, Qatar Free Zone Authority. So my question is related to how did you address the cultural diversity? Because I know that those youth that are coming from different backgrounds, like culturally. So how did you address, and I know the role of cultures into communication and these kind of things. So how did you address that cultural diversity to enhance the communication?
Thank you so much. We are now in the phase of understanding the problem and projecting the solution. We think that they should discuss on a more local problem, okay? They cannot discuss on too broad topics. Yeah, because if it is more local, it's easier for them to interact. And this relates also to the fact that minorities are many times are not involved in this debate because of the language. Translation is needed, however. This is important. There are many cases when it is about youth, there is no translation, in their own languages. And so this is the way. Local problem, smaller problem, smaller groups. Yeah. Yes, please.
So 1 minute for question and answer for one and one.
Thank you so much. I actually want to just comment on his question, which is basically training young people. This is for the first time. I'm Heetha. I'm from India, and we've co-founded the Youth Negotiators Academy. And we've actually addressed all the issues that he was talking about. We are working with 27 different countries, with 60 young people who are here as part of their national delegations. They are here negotiating. I have pictures coming in every minute from the different negotiating rooms. And we've done intense trainings on the language, on the technicalities, the overview of the multilateral system, the thematics of the UNFCCC, how to draft negotiations. We did a negotiation simulation last week before coming into Sharm. So we'd really love to see how we can work together with all of you to make this happen rather than doing individual siloed projects. So we'd love to collaborate with you to make this happen.
Thank you so much. Our idea is not to make this alone, but to find partners like you, to which we can also provide the results of the study, because information, scientific way is very important. So thank you so much, and look forward to move on in this dialogue with you. Thank you.
One last question then, please.
Thank you very much. It is amazing. This is very important issue, and thank you, Qatar. This issue is very important. Presentation is very useful and informative. My point is a model. We need a model a model put in the handbook for all the information, our negotiations issue. Can make this model to simplify this model to handbook to give the use and negotiation, facilitating to following the different issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is very important to create a framework, to create a model, because we cannot waste effort of no one, of youth, of us. We need a framework that makes things more effective. So it's the time for improvising, even if I'm an Italian, for cultural reason, we tend to improvise. It's done. It's done. Time and effort and urgency. There are too many things that make important now to be very focused. We cannot fail, so framework and models to be shared in the whole ecosystem, not only with the youth, but with all the surrounding actors that have a role. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Please, a big round of applause for Daniela. Wonderful. After that very exciting topic and presentation, we now move to discuss a recently released book on sustainability in Qatar. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Logan Cochrane. He's the Hamad bin Khalifa University in the College of Public Policy, HBKU. Also Dr. Davia Al-Mohanadi with Texas A&M University in Qatar, Tamuk. And Dr. Marcello Contestabili, also with HBKU, but with KIRI, the Qatar Energy and Environment Research Institute. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have the slides up? I think it's in presenter mode if you uncheck the presenter box. I think here so they don't block the screen. While they sort out the slides, let me make a few opening remarks. That the last session we were looking global, looking youth, looking outward from the state of Qatar. In this presentation, we'll be looking inward at some of the challenges that the state of Qatar is facing, and sharing with you a book, as Dr. Gonzalo mentioned, that is just about to be launched, bringing together an interdisciplinary approach or look to all the sustainability challenges facing the state. The book is called Sustainable Qatar, which you'll see in a moment. We could do it like this if we're not able to take it out of presenter mode. For those of you who are not familiar with the state of Qatar, there we go. My name is Logan Cochran. I'm from the College of Public Policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. And as I mentioned, I'm one of the editors of this book. The other editor wasn't able to be with us, but I'd like to acknowledge her leadership on this project, Reem Al-Hababi. So if you are new to learning about the state of Qatar, which you may be, I'd like to tell you just briefly a few things about it so you can have some context when we talk about some of the specifics of the climate challenges facing the country. So there we are. Qatar is a relatively small country and only shares a land border with Saudi Arabia. It has a relatively small population of 3 million, and of this, it has a unique demographic situation where the majority of its residents are not citizens. And as we'll discuss later on, some of the challenges here with a diverse demographic population is a communication and behavior change in the sustainability space. We've got FIFA World Cup coming up very shortly, in less than 2 weeks, and all sorts of excitement around the corner, which you will hear more about the sustainability objectives. Two that I'll mention here just briefly, which are also talked about in one chapter in the book, is that the FIFA World Cup 2022 will be the first carbon neutral and also the first plastic neutral. So the ambitions towards sustainability for the FIFA World Cup have created opportunities and legacies and catalysts for change within the country. Also, familiarizing yourself with the country. If it's new to you, Qatar is ranked very high on the Human Development Index and is similar in ranking to Portugal, and that's steadily been improving over the last couple of decades. As you'll hear more about later, that was enabled through particularly liquefied natural gas resources, which started in the mid to late 1990s. In terms of climate change, the country is, relative to others, well prepared, but still faces a number of challenges which you see on your screen here. We'll hear about some of them. Qatar is a low-lying country. Sea level rise will present challenges that require responses. Qatar is an arid and already hot country, so temperature rise and extended heat waves will present serious challenges for the country. We are seeing biodiversity loss in the marine space, which you may be able to predict, but also in the desert space, which we may not think as particularly biodiverse, but it is remarkably diverse in its biodiversity, and we are losing that with changes to the environment. We'll hear a little bit more about food security and air quality later in this presentation. As you see from the shift over time since the 1990s, Qatar has relatively been improving itself and in relation to other countries around the world in its capacity to overcome the challenges it faces with regard to climate change. To do this, the country produced a national vision in 2008, which combines human development, social development, economic development, and environmental development. This looks at the 4 pillars for the country, that all of them need to come together to achieve its objectives and its KPIs and the vision that it would like to have by 2030. The presentations we have later will also speak more about this vision. The book that we're launching today, I would like to tell you a few things that are exciting about it. One is that it's open access, which is great because if you're a researcher or you're interested in learning about sustainability, much of the evidence about sustainability is locked away in gated journals that you have to pay for. So if you're from the Global South, having open access research is critical, and it was great that Hamad bin Khalifa University was supporting the costs towards open access research and knowledge. The second point I'd like to note is that we're democratizing knowledge. There is a lot of research available out there, however, it's uneven. Some countries are heavily researched, some countries are less researched. So what we want to do with the contribution of this book is to make more information, particularly about the GCC and the Gulf region, as well as the Middle East and North Africa, more available in these arid environments. We're also highlighting local expertise. You'll hear from some of our local experts shortly. 34 of the 39 authors in this book are based in Qatar or were based in Qatar when they wrote it. And specifically for decision-making support in the country, we are providing localized responses with some pragmatic and practical ends of options, as well as more radical and transformative ends of options. Across the book, we tried to take interdisciplinary approaches. I won't go through all of the chapters. It will be soon available for free for all of you to download. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by a few of our authors who are going to tell you about their works. The first of which is Dr. Dhabi Al-Muhannadi, who will tell us about her chapter.
Thank you, Dr. Logan. And how can I switch? Is this one? The green one, perfect. Hi, everyone. So, as you heard, we wrote this chapter all together of different authors around Qatar on subjects that are related to sustainability and what's needed to help Qatar transition into the future. I come with a background of chemical engineering. I'm an assistant professor at Texas A&M University at Qatar. I studied chemical engineering throughout my undergrad and PhD. And I was very interested in the energy transition, energy system, but also carbon management and the carbon mitigation options. So throughout my time, I focused my research on carbon transition and how to achieve low carbon economy. So we came together and wrote this chapter with a colleague of mine, a PhD candidate, Sarah Al-Muhannadi, who's studying climate law actually in the UK right now. So Qatar is a hydrocarbon-based economy. Most of the wealth that is coming into the country comes from selling hydrocarbons, whether this is in the form of fuel, which is most widely known as natural gas, what we export as LNG. And this fuel actually goes all around the world. So you can see that Qatar only makes about 0.25 of the world's emission. And at the same time, it helps other countries reduce their own CO2 footprint by transitioning from a heavy polluted fuel, like say coal or oil, to something that is less polluted, which is natural gas. However, the country and the leadership have known that tying our economy to energy can be very unsustainable. So in 2008, they started drafting and they actually released the Qatar National Vision that we have been working on since 2030 and very close to fruition. So in there was looking into gas monetization, not just looking into fuel production, but other value-added products. At the same time, there's the environmental development, and most of the emissions are coming from industry, and they were aware of this. So we're looking into how can we actually reduce the local CO2 footprint in a sustainable way without looking into compromising our economy. At the same time, looking for alternative ways of diversification of the economy in Qatar Investment Authority away from any hydrocarbon-based industry. So just to reiterate, probably you've known this, Qatar is a hybrid arid. It's like it's hyper-arid, it means we have negative water. So we only have access to seawater, and most of the water comes into the country from desalination process that is powered by fossil fuels. We contribute to less than 1% of the total world's emission. And again, this is very important to keep in mind because we have a very negative emission per capita because of the small population. And Qatar has a small population. It's been growing around like 2.8 million. This was an old slide where it shows you like 1 million population. This is snap to the back, an image of CoP27 that was hosted in Qatar in 2012. I was an undergrad at that time, and I was very excited learning about all of the sustainability initiatives and the carbon emission targets, and motivate me to go to graduate school and study this. Qatar recently just showed that they are very highly committed to the energy transition. And one of the important announcements that happened earlier this year, actually late last year, was the emission target, the 25% emission by 2030. And in there, they have committed to phasing out any flaring that's coming out of their industrial activity, also to made a commitment to circular economy. At the same time, the Emir in 2019 made a very generous contribution to the developing countries by contributing $1 million to help small islands mitigate. At the same time, there is heavily involvement in investment in R&D and also joining global alliances to reduce the CO2 emission globally, like the Hydrogen Alliance, the Qatar Foundation, Rolls-Royce, they also have signed an agreement, and there are more and more of these agreements that we have seen, which are positive indications. Just to show you a little bit on where the emission is coming from, this is an image from Qatar at night, and you can see that there are some lit up areas over here. This is the Ras Laffan city, and this is Moecc city. This is where the industrial activity happens. So in Ras Laffan, there's where all the gas gets processed, and in Moecc, we have all of the petrochemicals. And together, they contribute to over 2/3 of the world of the total emissions in Qatar. So that gives us a really good advantage over other nations. It means all of our emissions are very concentrated in small places. And if you look into the type of emissions that are emitted, actually, they're very pure carbon dioxide streams that are separated from the industrial processes or from the extraction of natural gas itself. So Qatar has a huge challenge with, to diversify away from the hydrocarbons. So we have two challenges, which is we addressed in the chapter. How can Qatar reduce its carbon footprint locally? And how would you sustain the energy market if energy is the best solution to go with? And we concluded that this requires a systematic assessment of Qatar potential, challenges, and opportunities from a technical and a policy perspective at the same time. So there are some initiatives that we've seen on the ground, the adaptation of solar energy. And right now, I believe we have about 1 gigawatt of electricity being produced using solar energy. The plan is to go to 3 gigawatts, which is a really positive indication. There is a huge application of carbon capture and storage, and I'll show you this in a bit. There's investment by QIA, which is the Qatar Investment Authority, to decarbonize. And also there's investment in R&D and education, especially in Qatar Foundation and Qatar University, which Qatar already invested their returns of natural gas to help that. And other programs like the railway system, enabling e-vehicles, especially for a small population with a very high income, this is possible. So carbon capture and storage, Qatar has been aiming to, and actually building this for quite some time, is to capture some of the carbon dioxide that's coming out of the LNG process and putting it back underground. But also, it could be a future CO2 capture hub. So other countries can export carbon dioxide to Qatar, and Qatar can reduce it underground. There's the solar energy project that I just mentioned. This is in Al Kharsaab area, but there's also plans to build 2 new facilities. And these new facilities will take the contribution of solar energy from the 10% here, actually 10% peak demand, but actually around 33% of Qatar's emission. There's also adaptations of the hydrogen economy. We believe that hydrogen is the new frontier. There's little effort, but we believe that this is coming along, especially with the recent announcement by QAFCO, which is the Qatar Fertilizer Company, to produce blue ammonia. We're hoping to have green ammonia and so on. What we believe in is global problems would need local solutions. And we have been heavily researching this in Education City. And you can see here, we looked into the CO2 emission of Qatar, and we were able to develop custom plans and custom solutions using innovative tools that we developed in Qatar throughout. So this all developments, you can see here a list of papers that I will be talking about tomorrow, and probably could mention in a bit. And we were able to produce custom profiles that can tell you how Qatar reduced their emission using which solution when. This helps policy making methods and also enables evidence-based policies. So I believe the path forward is that hydrocarbons can have asset desertification, and huge investment in the industry that's been happening could be widely threatened. So we need to develop systems analysis and evidence-based policies, and to also look into the system as a whole and support material, energy, and resource integration. I show you a picture over here, which shows how processes can be integrated, and this is really possible in Qatar because we have a single owner of all of the petrochemical companies. And in there, we can come up with really, really cheap solutions to capture CO2 that is not available for any other country. And we applied this case for different places, and we saw what would be the priority for Qatar, say for Texas, for California, different kind of places, and you see the rank and prioritization of solution. So that's the end here, and I give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Marcello.
So which one is which? How do I move forward? This one is to move forward. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcello Contestabile. I work at the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute, where I lead economics and policy research on energy and the environment. Before I start my short presentation, I would like to make a little announcement. This afternoon at 5:15, the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute will be signing a memorandum of understanding with the IRENA, with the International Renewable Energy Agency. So I would like to invite everyone from the Qatar delegation who is still around to please join us. With that, I would like to just say a few words about the chapter I contributed to the book, which focuses on addressing sustainability issues from a systems perspective. We all know that sustainability is a multidimensional problem. We know from the old definitions of sustainability, like the Brundtland report, that it contains at least three dimensions: the environment, the economy, and society. And this is well recognized by the Qatar National Vision 2030 that was mentioned before by my colleagues. But it is important to appreciate that just addressing all dimensions as such is not sufficient, because all three dimensions are actually closely interlinked, and it's not just a case of trade-offs. It's not just a case of turning some environmental capital into economic capital and so on. There is real complexity behind all this, and therefore appreciating this complexity is essential in order to put in place adequate policies. This is something that, by the way, is certainly not unique to my chapter, because very many chapters in the book address this issue of complexity. But I do it in my chapter in a more systematic kind of way. So sustainability is a systemic issue in any country in different ways. When it comes to Qatar, I think a couple of things come to mind in particular. The issue of economic diversification and moving from a rentier model, if you like, to one that is knowledge-based. This was also touched upon by my colleagues before. This involves a complete transformation of the industrial system, of the social system, and economic system, really. So again, all these parts interact very closely when it comes to diversifying the economy. The other obvious one, especially for a hot and dry climate, is the so-called energy, water, food nexus. So, every country that needs to decarbonize will have to address energy, maybe food, and to a certain extent also water. But in climates like Qatar's, the three are so closely tied, because to produce water you need energy. Energy consumption is high because of the climatic conditions and because of the abundance of fossil fuels. And producing all this energy requires water. And to produce local food requires both energy and water. So I've just outlined a couple of particularly complex systemic issues that Qatar is facing when it comes to sustainability transition. And this needs to be properly understood to put in place effective policies. Now, the government in Qatar has to address these issues, and with more and more urgency, which means that understanding all this needs to be, a better understanding of all this needs to be developed quickly, And it is indeed happening, which is good to see. More and more, the interlinkages between these problems are being looked at. But in my chapter, I argue that more can be done, and there are tools available to us that have been developed and applied in many countries that can be adapted to the specific circumstances of Qatar. So first of all, there's some qualitative tools, and the most basic of which really, but it's so important and powerful at the same time, is system thinking. So one can start thinking of all the feedback loops that link different parts of the problem and map them so that they are properly accounted for in policy. And this is actually currently happening with the development of the third national development strategy, which is implementing the National Vision 2030. So this is good to see, but it needs to be done in a systematic way. Based on system thinking, there are some frameworks that have been developed around transitions. They can be technology transitions or social transitions, but the same kind of thinking applies. And around innovation systems, because this is also an important part. And here I'm just showing an example of like a framework that has been developed for innovation systems analysis. I won't go into the details, but it's important to see how the different parts are linked through feedback loops. Now, there are also quantitative tools, and again, different tools address different parts of the problem. So economic models, you want to look at policies to diversify the economy, policies to make the economy more efficient. You need economic models. One kind of model that is typically used is called general equilibrium. There is one already available in Qatar, and it's owned by the Planning Statistics Authority. Then you need models of, say, if you like, the energy system, which can be engineering models, exactly of the kind that my colleague Dr. Dabia discussed earlier. These two types of models can be actually integrated in techno-economic models of the kind that I'm developing with my team. Here is an example. So this is a tool that combines the bottom-up engineering approach with if you like, the top-down economic equilibrium approach. In addition to that, it's important to also model the environment, and I'm aware of certainly a few efforts already in Qatar to model different parts of the environment system, and all this can be combined into so-called integrated assessment models that are used more and more at global level as well as regional level to address sustainability issues. I'm not suggesting that Qatar should develop its own integrated assessment model just now, but at least make use of the currently available efforts, linking them in a soft way, and that can provide an awful lot of useful evidence that can help policymakers make more informed decisions. And this is where I would like to leave it, and I will hand it over to my colleague Logan. Oh, we have one more contribution.
Thank you, Doctor. I had a chance to write a short chapter as well. The editors were so kind to invite a non-academic to write something in a complicated book like that, so that was very nice of them. I'm Orion Lundberg from the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy. We have been working for the government to deliver the FIFA World Cup starting in 10 days. In my chapter, I talk about how the World Cup has been a catalyst for sustainability in Qatar. So the Qatar National Vision sets goals for 2030. It was published around 2010 sometime, and the 2022 was a nice midway point to check in on how it's going. And the World Cup also brought quite a few projects faster into fruition in Qatar. I talk about 3 areas for legacy. I discuss the physical legacy, green infrastructure, new power plants for solar power, new metro, new infrastructure for public transportation, improved green building uses, etc., etc. And then I cover the, shall we say, human capital legacy, which is about all the capacity building and the training and the awareness that's been happening around sustainability and environmental awareness in particular. Just on our construction project alone, we have trained hundreds, if not thousands of people on green building practices, as a simple example. We did that through formal training. We also did informal training with knowledge sharing and toolbox talks at the start of the day, etc. So just that general awareness, leaving a legacy of people being better informed and having new skills. And the last type of legacy I discuss in the chapter is about institutional legacy. How we now have built a stronger, more rigid assessment system for green buildings in Qatar. We have also set up a climate action carbon trading facility in Qatar, which was not there before, which is a new institution that will live on for a long time. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of the ministry, but now we have a climate change department, which was not there in 2010. So something's been happening in the country, and this is partially because of the World Cup, not entirely. So that's my chapter. I think Dr. Logan is targeting 10,000 downloads, so get on hitting that button. Let's see how we go. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. In our last couple of minutes before we open for questions, I'll pull some takeaways that we had from this work, this book that we've done. And first, I'd like to just show you some glimpses into Qatar if you've not been or if you're planning to go for FIFA. There have been significant shifts, as you just heard, in the last couple of decades. So here we'll just visualize it. You heard about the solar project that came online that will take 10% of peak energy. That was just came online recently. In the other side over there, you have Moecc, which is a sustainable city. And over here in the bottom, you have Lusail. And one just interesting thing about Lusail that I'll make mention, it deals with one of the challenges that another chapter whose author is not here talks about waste management. And how can we have new approaches to waste management? At present in Qatar, there isn't a segregated waste stream from source. It's segregated at the end of the supply of waste. In Lusail, they have developed a system where it is automatically sorted with the use of underground systems and artificial intelligence. So there's some great new investments into sustainability infrastructure. What I'll make note of very briefly is what we just heard on capacity. One of my friends is the director at the Public Transport Institute, and he says, now that we've done this with thousands of buses and shifting it into electric, we can handle anything. The capacity legacy is really significant, although we tend to often see these types of physical legacies. Of course, in a very brief 1 minute that I have left, the risks and hazards that face the country, as you saw them earlier, are diverse. They'll occur on different temporal scales and require responses that vary. Here, we've seen a little bit about transport, so I won't talk about it. Urban design, why I put Smart Plus? We have a chapter on smart cities, but in particular here they're talking about involving the human component of smart cities, the behavioral aspects, the attitudinal aspects that need to change alongside the development of smart cities. And you've heard about solar and hydrogen, so I'll talk about external risk management. Here we can see from the Food Security Department, with most of the food being imported into the state of Qatar, you need to mitigate risks to the food system, and there's a lot of interesting work, and one of the chapters covers some of this on food loss and food waste. We had only a brief opportunity to tell you about this work, which is the first of its kind. As I said at the beginning, there are some countries that are heavily researched, and you can find books after books after books about the climate challenges that they face. This is the first for the state of Qatar, and at a very high level, I found 4 lessons that came out, and then we'll hand it back over for questions. One is we heard significant capacity within ministries and significant new initiatives, policies, etc. within ministries. And the next realm is multi-sectoral collaboration, so we can have policy coherence and synergies across those ministries. Multiple chapters in the book highlight the need for this. Systems approaches you just heard about, so I won't repeat. And the enabling of the private sector. We have our friends at QFZ here and amongst others who need the right policy, legal and regulatory nudges and enabling pushes so that they can have a role alongside that of the public sector. And at where I work at Hamad bin Khalifa University, we've just launched a new master's degree on evaluation. And this responds to the last point, is that we have many great policies, many great regulations, and many great services. What we have less knowledge about is, are they working for whom, and where can we make improvements? So the monitoring, evaluation, and learning capacity, if you're in that world, that this is where we're trying to have this new degree and build capacity across the country, which was a key takeaway. which our college is responding to. Thank you very much for your time. If you would like to find the book, you can Google it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Logan. This is really a wonderful contribution. We actually have 5 minutes for questions, so I would like to invite our speakers to please join us up front, and we will take 2 or 3 questions. We have 5 minutes, but I think this deserves a good discussion. Nobody?
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Zaidan. I am from Mauritania. I just came to assist to this very interesting conference. So my question is that there are some poor countries like ours. I want to know how the others, I'm not talking to Qatar, but to others, how can they help us mitigate the impact of the climate change? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The issue of equity is coming up a lot. I don't know who wants to take it.
Thank you for this question. I will not speak on behalf of Qatar Fund for Development, but there is a state agency in Qatar, and it's led by His Excellency Khalifa bin Jassim Al Kuwari. He, as you saw, the $100 million commitment to the international community. And most recently, at the Doha Forum, there was a $200 million partnership with the Gates Foundation, where the state of Qatar is making significant contributions for other member states. I think that's the role of the state that I can speak to briefly. But
maybe you can elaborate, not just in terms of the funds, but also technology transfer and the knowledge that is generated.
Yeah, for sure. Qatar can also help in transferring some of the knowledge that developed locally. We had to deal with a very extreme environment. We have the high priority, small population, no food access. And up to recently, we had also some geopolitical instability from our neighbors. So we had to deal with a lot. Even with the World Cup, we have around twice the population coming to us, another 2 million expected visitors. So we had to learn quickly on how to adapt and how to do resilience. And I believe that Qatar can export and help people with this knowledge, taking that knowledge that was developed locally and helping the other nations. On the ground, there's some educational programs as well, from Education Above All and Solitic, that are trying to embed these sustainability, I would say, ethos in the next generation, so they can be helping them also grow when they grow in the future. So hopefully we can do some positive impact.
Marcello, please.
Yes, and I would just like to add that the institute I work for, the Qatar Environment and Energy Institute, and I know the same philosophy, by the way, applies to Earth now. We're not just looking at solutions for Qatar, we're looking at solutions, technology solutions and policy solutions for hot, arid countries. So we're looking to adapt technologies like solar PV, desalination and so on to these particular environments, and provide solutions that are not only fit for wealthy countries, but for developing countries as well.
Maybe a different flavor, but through the World Cup program, we've been running a program called Generation Amazing, where we have been working with developing nations, bringing football as a tool for development to many countries. I don't think we're in Mauritania yet, but maybe it's on the list. Rwanda, Palestine, Nepal, Bangladesh, etc., where we build football infrastructure and use the appeal of football to bring youth together to learn about sustainability, conflict resolution, leadership, etc. And many of those participants are now becoming football coaches and community leaders, because we've been running this program for 12 years now. So that's one example of how football can help. And it was lovely to see Team Mauritania participate in FIFA Arab Cup last year. I was at a couple of the matches, unfortunately didn't win.
Thank you so much. I think one more question. You have a question, please.
Quick question. Thank you very much for the nice book, Sustainability. It's covering all the sectors that in Qatar needs. Did you consider the National Climate Change Action Plan? And of course, the vision was there. the Qatar energy, Qatar environmental strategy and climate change. We have projects for mitigating, adapting to climate change. So I didn't have a chance to have details of the book. So did you take care of all these strategies?
Thank you, great question. Chapter 2, written by Reem Al-Hababi, the co-editor of the book, is about state regulation and strategy. And Chapter 3 is about sustainability law. So both of those chapters, Chapter 3 is Dr. Dami Lola at Hamad bin Khalifa College of Law. So they go into detail on these developments. Yes.
Thank you. Marcello, you want to just last word?
Very briefly, of course, I mean, we are very appreciative of all these recent developments, and we can see that a lot of work has gone into these strategies. But we also see that there is a growing realization within the government that this is will become a continuous process. It can no longer be done in discrete steps. And so it requires the involvement of local institutions and development of capacity. And what, at least in my chapter and in other chapters as well, we are starting to offer, if you like, approaches that could be used to further the strategies that have been developed in recent times.
Thank you so much. And please, a round of applause for the speakers, and congratulations on this wonderful book on Qatar sustainability, please. Let me now introduce the third presentation, but before that I want to remind everybody that at 5:15 there is the signature of the MOU between Irena and Kiri, and there will be free cookies, so make sure that you are there. So the third presentation is a continuation of yesterday's Pathways to Circular Economy in the Tourism Sector. We have a brief introduction by Engineer Meshal Al-Shamari from EarthNA, and then we will have Mr. Philippe Cornell from the Economy's Impact Unit. Meshal, please.
Very good evening to you all. First, I would like to introduce EarthNA, who don't know more about us. EarthNA, which is our legacy in Arabic, is a newly established policy center under the umbrella of Qatar Foundation. It aims to formulate policy options to help guide pathways towards sustainability for Qatar and other countries with hot and dry climate that face similar economic and environmental challenges like our country. So we work, and so most of our works and programs are targeting not only Qatar, but exceeds the boundary of the state of Qatar toward the whole region and cities or countries that have the same nature of Qatar. EarthNA started actually working and supporting the tourism and hospitality sector in year 2016, where we became the operator of the Green Key certification system for the green hotels, and also developed an eco event certification tool. And our aim was always to evaluate the market challenges and needs, engage decision-making authorities. So we work very closely with the Supreme Committee, with Qatar Tourism Council, Ministry of Environment, and other stakeholders to support our programs. Also, we work in building capacity, so we train the professionals who work in that field, and we develop technical courses and programs. Education and advocacy also is part of our main objectives. So we support and we do campaigns and outreach programs to advocate and also raise the awareness within the community members. Support the supply chain. So we work very closely with the private sector where we support the supply chain, the recycling industry, the waste management companies. So we work very closely with them also to be very qualified and up to the level to the future programs that we need them to be in. So because we believe that the tourism sector is highly dependent on resources from a wide range of sectors, generating a meaningful contribution to people's lives and economy, at the same time, the future of the sector needs to be linked to the urgent global effort to promote sustainability and to fight the environmental challenges. where the tourism sector has a very high contribution to the waste generated through that sector, and also CO2 emissions globally. So in this context, responsible tourism practices and sustainable tourism development have become a priority for the countries in the Middle East. And to achieve this transformation of the industry, a systematic approach necessary where different sectors collaborate. We need to engage all the stakeholders in the country to work to that objective with a focus on environmental, social, economical, and cultural dimensions. In this regard, we work with the Economist Impact to identify the tourism sector challenges in the Middle East and produced a report that's findings are based on extensive literature review and interviews with experts to provide insights on the potential pathways to circular for sustainable tourism in the Middle East. And now I would like to introduce Mr. Philip Cornell from the Economic Impact, who will present to you this report that we hope can be seen as a first step to motivate the industry to view sustainability tourism not as an option, but also as the only way forward. Please, Sharmeen, welcoming Mr. Philip to the stage.
So thank you very much, Michelle, for that kind introduction. And hello to everyone here. My name is Philip Cornell, and I'm the principal for energy and sustainability with Economist Impact. And I'm really pleased to be here to launch our report and our research sponsored by EarthNA, exploring pathways to circular tourism in the Middle East. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to walk you through some of the key findings for our research, and then I will open the floor. So after a complete and unprecedented halt in tourism at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, a slow recovery in global tourism is underway. Data from the UNWTO shows that global international tourist arrivals increased by 130% in January this year compared with January of 2021. The industry is a valuable contributor to livelihoods, and both directly and through its vast supply chain accounts for over 10% of global GDP. The recovery of the industry therefore signals wider economic recovery. At the same time, the industry is also responsible for 8% of global greenhouse emissions and 14% of waste generation. These environmental challenges are even more concerning in the Middle East, where the tourism industry is expected to double in size by 2030, according to the UNWTO. There is an opportunity, however, here to break this link between economic growth and environmental degradation by adopting circular tourism principles. Circular tourism is a way of achieving sustainability, but through an interconnected cross-stakeholder approach which goes beyond isolated initiatives. Sustainable tourism approaches focus on minimizing the adverse environmental impacts at every stage of the value chain for industry. For example, hotels may use smart meters to lower their electricity consumption or reduce their single-use plastics by replacing individual guest amenities with reliable, refillable options. Circular tourism instead takes a life cycle approach to tourism, focusing on recycling and regenerating resources to maximize use and reduce waste. One way in which hotels can adopt these principles, for example, is by using waste generated from one part of their operations as input to another. Food waste from hotel restaurants, for example, can be used to compost, to harvest produce on hotel premises, both minimizing waste and reducing emissions from having to source and transport produce externally. Other circular approaches in the hotel industry include storing rainwater to use in irrigation or for other water requirements, and producing and using renewable energy on site, for example, by installing solar panels. But how can the Middle East transition to circular tourism, and what are the challenges and opportunities for the region? So to answer these questions, we at Economist Impact led a research program which identifies a range of solutions to make the tourism in the Middle East more circular, and one that is mindful of current and future environmental impacts. The solutions that are identified in our study on global best practice circularity principles that can be adopted within the unique context of the region to maximize the use of resources and to minimize waste. The findings are based on a literature review and over 15 in-depth interviews with a diverse mix of global and regional experts from academic, policymaking, and private sector backgrounds. So what are the challenges to circularity in the Middle East? So to begin with, from our conversations with experts, it's clear that the Middle East is at an early stage on its journey towards circular tourism, owing to a unique set of challenges. First, according to many of the experts that we interviewed, the boom and bust nature of economies in the Middle East and high levels of unemployment mean that sustainability issues are often placed on the back burner in favor of more immediate action to revive the economy. Second, the hot climate, combined with access to cheap fuel, particularly in oil-producing countries, has meant that energy use has been historically high, with the Middle East alone accounting for 10% of global energy use for cooling. As a result, the incentive to transition to more renewable sources of energy has been low. Third, there's a view that there is an insufficient demand for sustainable tourism as it impacts the overall experience of luxury. But circular tourism can offer many opportunities for economic growth in the region by platforming local destinations and creating jobs. So how can countries in the Middle East convert challenges into opportunities to make progress towards circular tourism? Our research identifies a three-stage pathway. So to begin with, changing minds and behaviors is key. So to create action towards greater sustainability, the case for change needs to be clear, and that includes incentivizing industry players to adopt more sustainable practices and building awareness of the individual responsibility of tourists and the industry alike. Education to change behaviors then needs to be complemented with tangible initiatives targeted at reducing emissions and waste and improving social and economic performance. Finally, an easy and effective process is needed to collect data to monitor and measure the impacts of sustainable policies and initiatives and to hold stakeholders to account. This helps to close the loop, creating a virtuous cycle in which more data enables more action towards sustainability. So to begin with, changing the mindset of all tourism stakeholders towards sustainability is the single most important hurdle to overcome before progress can be made. So imagine if you're a conscious tourist, but you don't have any options for sustainability. You can't make the change. Similarly, if you implement sustainable initiatives as a supplier, but tourists are not conscious, then they won't have the impact that you want. So on the supply side, we find that a major barrier to the implementation of sustainability initiatives is the view that it might detract from service quality or from customer experience. Tourists on the demand side can help to shift those perceptions. Surveys reveal a shift in tourist preferences towards more eco-friendly options. And there are also concerns over the perceived cost implications of greener holidays. So education plays a primary role in raising awareness around the issues of sustainability and bridging the gap between perceptions of tourists and the industry to encourage simultaneous shifts on both sides. So the first step is to establish intent across all stakeholders. Next, successfully transitioning the tourism industry to a pathway of circularity requires cross-stakeholder collaboration to achieve scale and impact. All stakeholders can take tangible actions to embed circular practices. First, policymakers must define the agenda and set goals for sustainability for the industry. So while countries in the region are beginning to refer to sustainability in their tourism strategies, the identification of specific instruments such as regulations and incentives is lacking. Policymakers also play a role in developing a supportive infrastructure and policy environment. So for example, a recent study estimates a sizable market opportunity to develop recycling infrastructure, which could support sustainability and add 50,000 new jobs across the Gulf countries. So next, with strategic commitment towards sustainability, the industry and tourists themselves play a role in delivering on goals to reduce tourism emissions. One way to achieve this is to reduce consumption entirely. So for example, transport for tourism accounts for 5% of all man-made CO2 emissions according to the UN WTO. So before they even arrive at their destination, tourists have already created a substantial carbon footprint. They can manage excessive use of transportation by traveling less frequently, spending more time at a destination, or traveling shorter distances. So an alternative approach to cutting consumption altogether is to consume more responsibly and optimize, rather than to reduce. So that could entail, for example, active decisions by tourists to switch modes of transportation that are less energy intensive. It could also involve the industry optimizing their consumption of energy and resources. So hotels, for example, can use smart meters to manage their use of energy for heating, for cooling, for lighting, or for their use of water. And finally, localizing supply chains can help to make the industry more sustainable while also benefiting the local communities. So by sourcing products locally, the distance traveled between production and consumption is reduced. So minimizing those carbon emissions from the transportation process. And one key challenge in the Middle East is the lack of local alternatives in many cases. Regulations and green procurement policies can play an important role setting standards for supply use and developing those local industries. And mega events, we were just hearing about the World Cup. Mega events can provide a novel opportunity to embed these sustainability practices in the Middle East and to address challenges on both the supply and the demand side. The Middle East is rapidly establishing itself as a global platform to host large international events. On one hand, there are concerns that these events can lead to sizable impacts that are environmentally harmful. But they can also place the region under scrutiny for its environmental practices and can act as an accelerator for the sustainable tourism agenda, from educating attendees on the need for sustainable action to showcasing best practices for sustainability. But to deliver that lasting impact, these events need to be viewed from a long-term strategic perspective. So instead of an event by an event basis, you need to look at the strategic side. So for example, consideration needs to be given to how the infrastructure built for the event will be used going forward to retain the value created. In conducting our research, we had the opportunity to speak with the head of sustainability for the London Olympics in 2012, who reflected that while the event itself was the first of its kind to deeply embed environmental practices, the effects of that were not necessarily sustained. And finally, while embedding sustainable initiatives is the starting point for building a sustainable tourism industry, these initiatives need to be monitored to measure progress and to hold stakeholders to account. So with the right data, travel agencies, for example, can curate alternative tourism packages to allow customers to then make informed and more sustainable choices. Globally, organizations like Skyscanner are beginning to provide travelers with options to search for greener flights, but this is only possible if the data is available in the first place. Third-party certification governed by regulators can enable the collection of data, providing a basis for measuring the impacts of sustainability initiatives across the industry. But these measures also need to be non-burdensome, as the costs of meeting requirements often fall disproportionately to smaller businesses. So as a summary here, I mean, circular tourism offers significant opportunities for the Middle East to manage the environmental consequences of tourism while showcasing its unique and diverse local culture and addressing the region's economic challenges and ambitions. So although there are many challenges to market transformation, there are even greater opportunities. And that concludes our presentation here. Please feel free to download the report using this QR code. And I think we'll be happy to turn to questions also with Michelle.
Thank you very much. So much, Dr. Cornell. Please a round of applause for this great presentation.
Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Please.
Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned job creation in the waste management of the circular economy, around 55,000 jobs. So what kind of jobs are these? And this is across the GCC you mentioned. Are they like engineers or is it more like low paying?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving towards a greener waste management environment includes sort of a spectrum of jobs, including data management, but also engineers, and also a whole host of people that are serving sort of at the transport and the intermediary stage between sort of the waste, old style waste management to what we're doing future in a green environment. So there's an expansive amounts of jobs across the entire value chain of waste management.
Thank you. Any more questions, please?
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Dr. Taha Badawi from Sudan, Red Sea State, Sudan. Really, I want to ask about this strategy. Is it strategy? The strategy of tourism, is it based on ecotourism or community-based link? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about sustainable tourism and circular tourism, it's both sides. So it's about, on the eco side, we're talking about increasing efficiency, reducing waste, and improving circularity inside the substantive area of tourism. But there's also a real local tourism component. And so what we found, for example, is that in order to benefit the most economically from circular tourism, improving the profile, for example, of local tourism destinations can have a big impact on that local employment, for example, as tour guides or using local populations that obviously know very well their local environment and local conditions. And so you can find a significant crossover by increasing the locality of tourism to enhance the economic opportunities as well as to achieve some of the some of the ecological benefits that we're looking for. But I don't know if Michelle, you have any comment.
Yeah, I think if you download the report, you will see priorities for each segment, for each stage. We have stakeholders who plays an important role in each stage. So in some stages, you will see priority or key role for the policy-making authorities. In others, you will see a key role of supply chain. Others, you will see a key role of tourists. So it depends on the stage also of the process.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Cornell and Engineer Al-Shamari, for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Please, a round of applause for our speakers. Well, the last presentation of this block is by Engineer Ashraf Kinawi from EarthNA, and he will present the results of the Al-Wakra Municipality Greenhouse Gas Accounting Project Case Study. We are going to run a little bit over the allotted time because we had an exciting program, so we will be finishing by 3:15 at the latest, and we're going to have some refreshments at that time. So please, Ashraf, come in.
Good afternoon, everyone. A quick presentation here about the ongoing effort between EarthNA and the municipality of Al-Wakra. Basically, it is an initiative that Al-Wakra really started. We'll go over what we have done so far and the method of calculation as well. So just to give you a little introduction about Al-Wakra, Al-Wakra is the second largest municipality in Qatar from the perspective of area. It has it's bound. It has a long coastal line and is bounded with Saudi Arabia. It has a lot of interesting ecological features like Khor al-Udaid and the sand dunes, as well as very nice beaches. We did. So this is just quick features of Al-Wakra. It also houses one of the FIFA stadiums, the the Al Janoub Stadium, designed by Zaha Hadid, the metro station for the Red Line, as well as the Al Wakra Hospital. It has few ports and also desalination plants. It has a significant industrial portfolio. However, the industrial sector was excluded because it's not under the control of Al Wakra municipality. So basically, the engineer Muhammad Hassan Al-Naimi, the director of the municipality, approached Ertana. Dr. Sheikh Saud signed the MOU in May this year, and we started the project right after. The benefits of having greenhouse gas accounting is, first of all, you would have, you need to identify the risks associated with it. So you need to have a visibility and account all the types of greenhouse gases emitted within the boundaries. You need to also have, you'll also benefit from a global recognition through reporting to GCOM or the CDP. You will also manage to start mitigating the emissions. So basically, we assembled a small team with the municipality as well as with the utility company, Karama, because a lot of data has to be collected from different places. It's a huge effort to collect all the data for the greenhouse gases emissions. From a responsibility perspective, there are a few, like a little bit of a responsibility matrix is created to initiate the process and understand the exact details of the entire scope. We had to go through the boundaries of Al Wakra municipality and the subzones within the municipality to identify all the types of uses within the boundaries. So as I mentioned before, we had to exclude some national institutions or industries that are not really under the control of the municipality. For example, the QFZA zone or Mesaid Industrial, the petrochemicals, and so on. So going through the greenhouse gases emissions calculations, we went through Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 as per IPCC standards, the protocol. So Scope 1 is direct emissions for any stationary or even mobile items that are under the control of the municipality combusting the fuel. Scope 2 is indirect combustion, which is electricity fed to the municipality, as well as Scope 3. Scope 3 is a little bit complicated and it's optional. However, we did calculate Scope 3 for water because water in Qatar is basically generated through desalination and has a significant carbon footprint. We haven't completed actually Scope 1 yet. A few items have to be still added, but we already completed the electricity and water. So just to give you an idea about the calculations, you really have to dig into all the emission factors based on the types of emissions available in that area. And also very specific type of emission factors dependent on how, let's say, electricity is generated in Qatar. So we basically use the IEA standards, IPCC as well for some refrigerants, as well the BIS and Eco-Invent for LCAs, specifically for the desalination. So our initial findings show that which is around 85 to 90% of the total emission expected is mostly residential, because we're talking about municipal level emissions. We're not talking about national industries. So basically, residential accounted for about 79% of the emissions. That's for water and electricity. And comes right after that, healthcare and municipal buildings, and then commercial and educational. So our total up to this moment is around 788,000 tons of carbon per year. I just wanted, I might have missed to mention the base year. Our base year was from January to December 2021. So basically, once we conclude our reporting, we'll get a third-party verification. We worked with a couple of them already on Education City campus, South Pole, and as well as DMV. And hopefully, once we got the verification completed, we will also do a reporting to the Global Covenant of Mayors, which have a CRF standard of reporting. They have a lot of also good tools and sort of capacity building, that they collaborate with a lot of mayors and helped a lot of cities around the world for in carbon emission reductions. We did also previously do a reporting to CDP for the Education City campus. So potentially we can do that as well here. So after the baseline is completed, we will go through reduction targets. So reduction targets can be done in several methods, either by just having a percentile reduction based on a year, specific year. So if, let's say, our current baseline is 2021, we'll just say we'll go, let's say, targeted 15% in the next 5 years. Or we go with option 2, which is intensity target based on a per capita basis. Or option 3 would go with a scenario target, baseline scenario target from a business as usual perspective, similar to the NDC for Qatar. A fourth one is a fixed level target, which is to control an absolute emission level in a specific year target. So, so basically, as we all know, that the national determined contribution of Qatar 2021 submitted to the UNFCCC is 25% from BAU of 2030. So potentially, we would maybe parallel that on a municipal level. Just wanted to also highlight that just from a potential targeted areas is cooling loads, because cooling loads are quite significant in Qatar due to the weather, and they account approximately 40% for buildings. So that would be through increase in insulation or reduction on radiation, solar heat gain to roofs, and glazing. We also will look at water consumption and the refrigerant types. I just wanted to show you a little example here on the refrigerant types. Some of them are already discontinued and not allowed. Some of them also will be discontinued by next year. But you can see the global warming potential of these gases compared to CO2 equivalent. Very, very significant. Even though they're not as a big quantity, but they're significant. So in conclusion, this is a very good initiative from the municipality. It's also important to acknowledge that municipalities can play a huge role in emission reductions in Qatar. It doesn't have to be through the national governments. I'm sure that municipalities can take a big role in this perspective, and government and ministries can also enable municipalities to be a key player. So that would be through capacity building from the ministries, as well as data sharing, which is very, very important, and financing, direct financing to their efforts, and also creating an intermediate intergovernmental collaboration to help and assist in this effort. Just wanted to acknowledge some of my colleagues. They're not present here, but their effort is very important, and we wouldn't have been able to do this type of report without their help. Mohammed Al-Hashmi from Al-Kahrama, Suha Tufela from the municipality, Hassa Al-Abdullah, Ibrahim Osman, and Francis is actually here. Francis, thank you, my colleague, and with that I conclude. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ashraf, for this very exciting presentation. You can stay there because there are questions now. So, any questions from the audience? Please.
Thank you, Ashraf. Very interesting, I think, work.
Thank you.
So I was curious because you saw the residential sector has the highest emission.
Right.
And I think the industry emissions was not included, right? Some of the industry which...
All national industries are not included.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm wondering like what could be the... If they were included, what could have been the share of industrial emissions? And my second question is like what kind of challenges you faced when you estimated the scope 3 emissions?
Okay. I hope I heard you well, Dr. Pernab. First, on the industrial part, the ones shown here are pretty much like small workshops, workshop uses, but we're not under the municipal level control. We can really tell them how to reduce emissions. We totally excluded any national industries like Moecc petrochemicals or any industry of that scale. Yeah. On your second question was, sorry if I missed that.
Scope 3.
Oh, scope 3. So scope 3, we focused on water only for so far. We will try to collect as much data as possible for, let's say, staff commute and travel. But it's very difficult to do a complete value chain for a municipality. So I would say it would be impossible really to complete scope 3. Yeah, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Another question here.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you.
I would have really missed if I were not here. It's so interesting. Just the question is about the boundaries. You talk of official boundary and geographical boundary, because this is a presentation that we want to take back to my country. Well, by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is John Abarde from Nigeria.
Nice to meet you.
So what is the difference between that official boundary and geographical boundary?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very good question, Jonathan. Okay. Basically, the official boundary is very important. It will define the municipal demarcations. However, we still have to exclude areas that are outside the control of the municipality. So, for example, when you have, let's say, a military base, you know, it's a national level control, or let's say a national industry. We have also desalination plants for the whole country. It would be unfair to load their carbon footprint on the municipality itself. So whatever is outside the control of the municipality has to be excluded. That's the bottom line. So really, it's geographical and official boundaries, and the third layer would be the control boundary, the control boundary of the municipality that have to be overlaid to define exactly the exact greenhouse gases emission boundary. You know, thank you. I lived in Nigeria for some time, right? So I had a good time when I was young. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for the question.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. Are there more questions, please? Okay, I have one question. This, as you said, is the first step to get on a journey to reduce carbon emissions. First, you need to understand what is the baseline, where are the emissions coming from. But once you start to identify where the reductions can take place, there is an element of cost. So there will be a cost curve where you may start to reduce some things very quickly because they are cheap. In some cases, it may be a negative cost. It makes sense purely in economic terms. And then you start to get into much more expensive reductions. How do you calculate that? How do you get into that type of path towards decarbonization?
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalo. This is a very good question. Actually, yes, absolutely. We have to prioritize based on our current financing and time limits. Usually there are a few hanging fruits. So like very similar to what we see in some standards like the ASHRAE 211 standard, where you can usually have a no-cost action, easily done without any cost. And the second would be a low-cost option, which is operational. We look at operations, how we can really reduce it without even major capital investment. And then we go to the third level, which is capital intensive action, that where we have to change existing mechanical systems or major retrofits to buildings.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashraf. With this, I think we conclude. Please, a round of applause. So I want to close the session and thank everybody for your active participation. And the timing is perfect because now we have refreshments on the table, so please go ahead. And thank you very much for coming to this session. Thank you.